Last week, Pastor Peter talked about Abraham standing on Mount Moriah with his son Isaac, facing the ultimate test of obedience. God had asked him to do something that seemed to contradict everything he knew about God and about God's character. Yet Abraham trusted God enough to raise the knife, believing that even if Isaac died, that God could bring him back to life. That is a picture of obedience, but it's also a picture of extreme faith. Trusting God when nothing makes sense, when the path forward seems impossible, and when obedience requires us to act against our natural instincts. So today we are starting a new series called Leap of Faith, and we had not talked about that at all, about what he was preaching on or anything ahead of time and all of that, but the two just kind of tied in perfectly. So he got to do, I think he got to do week 0 of the series, because this is technically week 1, but you know how 0 week goes with that. But we're going to see that while not all of us will face an Isaac moment, I truly believe that all of us will face a Jordan River moment where God calls us to step forward before we can see how things are going to work out. So over the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about what it means to live by faith in practical, everyday ways. Today, we're talking about getting ankle deep. Next week, we're going to look at getting out of the boat when Jesus calls. The week after, we're going to look about having faith to follow even when the path is unclear. And the last week, we're going to talk about what it means to maintain faith even in the fire. My guess is you probably can plug in kind of the scripture passages we're going to land on each of those weeks. But it all starts here with this first step. Now, as most of you know, just over a week ago, our family was in Rocky Mountain National Park. Now, the good news is, theoretically, we're going to claim we brought some cooler weather back with us. You know, cool weather in Texas in August means like low 90s, and we will take it as long as we can get it. But the beauty up in Rocky Mountain National Park is just amazing. Hopefully many of you have been there. If not, you've seen pictures of it, but it's breathtaking. And we spent time driving around and doing a little bit of hiking in the park and everything like that, taking in the majestic peaks that are there, the tall pines, and the crystal clear streams that run down from the mountain. Now, in several places, we saw lakes and streams where there were people in the water fly fishing. We've got a good friend, we've got some good friends up there in Fort Collins. He loves to go fly fishing. He doesn't get to do it that much, but he talks about it frequently. He tells the story, he told the story at camp one time back about fly fishing, and my sister-in-law, I'm trying to remember if she was my sister-in-law at that point or not. I think she was already by then, but like, they talked about something in the, that you do fly fishing in the river, and she goes, hey, somebody lied to me. And like, somebody had convinced her that like fly fishing involved a plane or a helicopter or something and doing fishing there. I won't name which one, so I won't hopefully get in too much trouble. But now, I didn't get in the water this trip myself. I stayed on dry ground, but I watched those streams, as they just kind of ebbed and flowed and all of that, and I started to imagine what it would be like. Imagine standing in one of those icy cold streams, because I know Andrew, at least at some point, tested the water, put his hand in or something to feel it, and it was nice and cold. The water looks perfect. It's clear, it's peaceful, it's inviting. You see others, again, they're wading in, they're fly fishing, they're laughing, they're enjoying themselves. And maybe you would think in that situation, I could do this too. But then the doubt begins to creep in, and you're like, but how cold is it really? Will I be able to handle it? What if I lose my footing and I slip and I fall? And there's the tension. It's the moment before the first step. You haven't even touched the water, but you're already counting the cost. And that's a lot like faith, isn't it? Faith doesn't start when everything is comfortable and familiar. It begins at the edge, the place where you're invited to trust before you feel steady. It's the choice to step into the unknown, even when you don't know what it's going to feel like or how deep it's going to get. And let's be honest with each other this morning. Many of us here, whether in the room or online again, we're standing on the edge of something, aren't we? Maybe it's a difficult conversation that you need to have with someone. Maybe it's finally stepping into a ministry opportunity that you've been wrestling with for months. Maybe it's a big life decision or major life change. We have some major life changes coming up in our family this month and the following month as well. We want guarantees, don't we? We want the path to be clear. We want the water to be tested and know it's nice and clean, which in the mountains it usually is pretty well. We want the outcome to be assured before we take our first step. It's like Cowboys fans in the preseason. If you think about it, we want to see how the team looks. We want to know what the injury report says. We want to look at the schedule. And then we want to know which superstar Jerry has made so mad that they want to trade before we get a chance to look and say how good the team is going to be in the season. Does that sound about right? I think so. But here's the problem. Faith doesn't work that way. Faith starts with motion. We don't get clarity and then move. We move and then God brings clarity. We don't see the results and then trust. We trust and then God shows us what he can do. Think about it. If Abraham had waited for complete understanding, he would have never started the 3-day journey to Mount Moriah. He would have never experienced God's provision, and he would have never gotten to hear God say, "Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." The truth is that many of us have been waiting on the riverbank far too long. We've been analyzing, thinking about it, praying about it, and waiting for the perfect conditions. But faith isn't about perfect conditions. Faith is about taking the step when God says go, even when the water looks cold and deep. And that brings us to an incredible story. It's found in Joshua 3. You're welcome to turn that way, or we'll get there on the screen in just a moment. But the Israelites have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Moses has died, and now Joshua is leading them. God has promised them the promised land, but there's one small problem. The Jordan River is between them and going in to the promised land, to receiving God's promise. Let's pick up in Joshua 3, starting in verse 1. It says, "Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went through the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you're to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near it." Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." Joshua said to the priests, "Take up the ark of the covenant and pass on ahead of the other people." So they took it and went up ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river." Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. See, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand in a heap. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the ark of the covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest." And we're going to stop right there for a moment. This isn't just an ordinary day at the Jordan River. Verse 15 right there just said the Jordan is at the flood stage all during the harvest. The implication here is it's at flood stage when they get there. The river is overflowing its banks. It's rushing, it's dangerous, it's impassable. We have seen the power of rivers that are flowing beyond their banks just in the last month. And if you're thinking logically, this is the worst possible moment to decide to try to cross the river. Any reasonable person would wait for the water levels to go down, maybe build some boats, or maybe go upstream to try to find a better place to go across. But God doesn't operate on our timeline of convenience. He operates on his timeline of purpose. Let's look again at verses 7 and 8, what God told Joshua there. "And the Lord said to Joshua, 'Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that you may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river.'" Did you catch that last phrase again? Go and stand in the river. Not wait until I stop the river and then go in. Not I'll clear the path and then you follow. It was go and stand in the river while it's flowing. And this reveals to us something crucial about how God works. He often requires our movement before he reveals his method. Think about other moments in Scripture. Abraham had to leave everything familiar in Ur before God showed him the promised land. We'll touch on that one in a couple of weeks. Moses had to stretch out his hand over the Red Sea before it parted. The widow of Zarephath had to pour out her last bit of oil before the miracle of this incredible multiplication began. And Elijah had to pour water on the altar before God sent down the fire. God isn't being difficult or mysterious just for the sake of it. He's building something in us that can only be built through the exercise of faith, trust, dependence, and the deep knowledge that he is faithful. Picking up in verse 15 again, now the Jordan is at the flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the sea of the Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The miracle didn't happen before they moved. The miracle happened when their feet got wet. And that's how faith works. Faith means stepping before we see the outcome. Faith means getting our feet wet before we see God part the waters. The writer of Hebrews puts it this way in Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Faith is stepping into the flood when God says go. Faith is trusting that the God who calls you to the water is the same God who controls the water. There is a great scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, one of my favorites of the Indy series. I won't get started on ranking them today, but there's a scene in this movie, and Indiana Jones has been working his way. He has this Grail diary that his dad had helped compile, and he's been working on, and he's gotten to this point. His dad has been shot now as motivation for Indy to go and find the Grail. And so he can hear his dad in the distance in pain. But he comes and he's at the edge of this great chasm, and all you can see is the depths of the drop that is in front of him. And in the diary, it says to take a leap from the lion's head. Well, he sees this lion's head, but he doesn't see, he's like, there's no way I can make it across, like even further than me trying to step across or jump across the length of this room. There's no way it's going to happen. But again, he hears his dad yelling out and all of that. And as he's thinking and he's reflecting on it, he's like, I've just got to take a leap of faith. And he does this, and I got to give myself enough room because he lifts his leg. It's almost like he's getting ready to do the crane kick. And he just closes his eyes and does this. And when he does it, an invisible bridge that has been there is revealed as his foot lands on the solid ground of this bridge, and all of a sudden he can see the path across. And that's where the title of this series of Leap of Faith comes from, that picture for me. And that is a picture of what happened at the Jordan River. The priests couldn't see the dry ground before they stopped. They had to trust that God had already prepared the way, even though it wasn't visible yet. And we try to explain how God does miracles, and that's if you look at a miracle and something like all of a sudden the river stopping and it becoming dry ground, like it is an absolute miracle. What I love to think as I think about this, though, is that very likely God knows they're going to take this step, and he has already started the process of stopping the water behind them. So when they take that step, all of a sudden, in that moment, it will be revealed what God has already been working and moving. That's just me speculating on that, looking out on that. I mean, God can snap his finger and boom, it happens right in that second that's there. But that's the thing there is God can come through in the moment when we need him. But here is the question for us this morning. What is our Jordan River? What's standing between you and what God has called you to do? What's the step that you've been avoiding because conditions don't look favorable? Maybe God's calling you to have a conversation about faith with someone that you care deeply about, someone in your life who doesn't know Christ yet, and you've been waiting for the perfect moment to share Christ with them. But here's the thing, the perfect moment might be now, and it might require you getting your feet wet first. Maybe God's calling you to step into generosity in a way that stretches you. Maybe He's calling you to serve in a capacity that feels bigger than your comfort zone. Maybe He's calling you to pursue reconciliation with someone when the relationship feels like it's at flood stage. Or maybe you're someone who hasn't made the decision yet to follow Christ, and maybe God's calling you to take that first step, to stop standing on the bank, to analyzing and overthinking it, and to simply trust Him with your life. Now, for all of us, let me address one thing that is very likely in the back of your mind somewhere, because it's often in the back of my mind as well. What if you step out and things don't work the way you think they're supposed to? What if you take the step of faith and the outcome isn't what you hope for? Here's what I've learned. God doesn't promise that every step of faith will lead to the outcome that we envision. But He does promise that every step of faith leads us closer to Him. And sometimes that's the whole point. The question isn't whether stepping out in faith guarantees success by our definition. The question is whether we trust God to obey Him even when we can't see the full picture. Abraham walked up to Mount Moriah not knowing that God would provide a ram. He walked in obedience, trusting that God's character was bigger than his own understanding, and God met him there. The priest stepped into the flooding Jordan, not knowing exactly when the water would stop. They stepped out in obedience, trusting that the God who called them to the water was the same God who could control the water, and God met them there. Now, I love my Rangers. We referred to the Cowboys earlier, and who knows what we're going to get out of them this year. But the Rangers earlier in this year, there were a lot of times where like, I just don't know that they're going to get it together. And still, you look at the last 3 games, and you're like, well, good thing they won yesterday. Because, but a lot of us were kind of wondering if they'd ever put that winning streak together to get back in playoff contention. But they did. They had a great run coming right out of the All-Star break. But here's the thing, sometimes the breakthrough happens when you stop waiting on the perfect conditions to come and you just play the game that's in front of you. And they relaxed and started playing and things came together for them. But faith doesn't begin with the head, it begins with our feet. It begins when you stop thinking about what could go wrong and start trusting the one who can make everything right in the end. Maybe you've been waiting for God to move first, but today He's saying to you, I'm ready to move, but you've got to take the first step. It might be a step towards healing. It might be a step towards hope. It might be a step towards Him. The beautiful thing about the story in Joshua is that God doesn't just stop the water. He holds the water back the entire time for everyone to go across. Joshua 3:17, the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground. There's your miracle as much as anything, is this ground that had been flooded just moments before. The water hasn't just stopped. The ground is now dry. While all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. When you step out in faith, God doesn't just give you enough for the first step. He provides what you need for the entire journey. He just may not show you it all at first. Can you imagine what would happen if Community North became known as a church full of people willing to get ankle deep? If we became known as the kind of people who don't wait for perfect conditions to follow God. If we were the kind of church where people said, I don't know what's going to happen, but I trust the God who has called me to this. What if we became known not for our programs or for our campus or any of those things, but for our willingness to step into the flood when God says step? I think about my Baylor Bears getting ready for the football season. Coach Aranda, he doesn't get to wait until all the players are healthy. He doesn't get to wait until they've perfected every play that they're going to run all season long. There's a point where you just have to get on the field and play the game. And the same thing is true for us as followers of Christ. At some point, we've got to stop preparing for our faith and actually put it into practice. Imagine if we became a church where people stepped into difficult conversations because they trusted that God would give them the words. Families chose generosity over security because they believed God would provide. Individuals said yes to opportunities that stretched them because they knew that God would equip them. The people would share their faith naturally because they weren't afraid of getting into those conversations and getting their feet wet. And those who have been sitting on the fence about following Jesus finally took that step of commitment. Let's be the kind of people who say, I don't have to wait until I see the entire river split. I just need to trust the one who can part the waters. And the miracle in Joshua 3 wasn't just about crossing a river. It was about a generation learning to trust God in impossible circumstances. It was about a people who had wandered for 40 years actually taking possession of what God had promised to them. That one act of faith had ripple effects that lasted for generations. Joshua 4 tells us they took 12 stones and they built a monument there. They set them up as a memorial so that when their children would ask, why are those stones there? Why is that memorial there? They could tell them the story of what God had done in that moment, the story of God's faithfulness. Your step of faith today may be the story that your kids and your grandkids tell about the day that you decided to trust God completely. It might be the moment that changes not just your life, but the lives of people that you haven't even met. And while we step out in faith together, creating a culture where trusting God becomes normal, where taking risks for the kingdom becomes expected, and we're getting our feet wet as just what we do, it's going to be amazing to see what God does. This is just the beginning of our journey that we're taking over these next few weeks. Next, we're going to talk about, again, what it means to get out of the boat when comfort ends and Jesus calls us to something beyond our safety zone. In the weeks that follow, we're going to explore having faith to follow even when the path is unclear, and again, maintaining faith even when the heat of the trials comes. But it all starts here with the willingness to get ankle deep. So as we close this morning, I want you to think about where God may be calling you to take a first step. Maybe it's been so long that you've thought about it, since you've thought about it, that you've almost forgotten. Or maybe it's so fresh on your heart that you can't think about anything else. Here's what I know. The God who stopped the Jordan River at flood stage is the same God who wants to work in your life today, but he's waiting for you to step into the water. Faith flows when we take the first step, not the second step. Not the let's see what happens or, let's see how the first step goes, but when we take the first step itself. So if you're here this morning, and again, in person or online, and you've never taken that step of following Jesus as your Savior, you've never stepped in that cold mountain stream there, that moment is available to you right now. You don't have to wait till you have all your questions answered or until your life is perfectly in order. God's inviting you to step into the water of faith, trusting that he will hold back whatever is threatening to overwhelm you. If you're a follower of Christ and you're standing on the bank of obedience and you've been there far too long, maybe today's the day for you to stop waiting for better conditions and start trusting God who controls all of the conditions. And just like Abraham on Mount Moriah, just like the priest carrying the ark into the flooding Jordan, God is calling you to trust him when you can't even see the outcome yet. The water might be cold. The current might be strong. But the God who calls you to step in is the same God who will meet you in the river. Let's pray.